The scrapyard outside New Terra Station stretched for miles in every direction, a graveyard of broken dreams and forgotten technology. Jake Murphy had been working there for 3 years now, and he knew every corner of this metal wasteland like the back of his hand. The morning sun reflected off twisted hull fragments and scattered debris, creating shadows that danced between the towering piles of salvage. Jake wiped the thick grease from his calloused hands with an old rag as he walked his usual route through the maze of derelict vessels. His boots crunched on loose metal shards and broken glass. Today's job was simple enough. A new shipment of abandoned cargo haulers had arrived last night, and he needed to strip them for parts before the salvage crews moved in tomorrow morning. He was humming an old Earth song when he heard it. A sound that made him stop dead in his tracks. A low, rattling breath that definitely didn't belong to any machine he'd ever worked on. It was wet and labored like something struggling to pull air into damaged lungs. Jake's first thought was that maybe some drunk spacer had passed out between the containers. It wouldn't be the first time. But something about that sound made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. This wasn't human. He followed the sound, weaving between two massive cargo containers that had been stacked haphazardly against each other. The smell hit him first, metallic and sharp, mixed with something wild and animal. Blood. A lot of it. That's when Jake saw the creature and his heart nearly stopped beating. It was wedged in the narrow space between the containers, its massive body barely fitting in the gap. The thing was huge, easily the size of a small shuttle, maybe 12 feet from nose to tail. Its fur was the deepest black Jake had ever seen, like it absorbed every bit of light that touched it. The fur looked soft despite being matted with blood and dirt. But it was the eyes that really got him. 6 of them. 3 pairs arranged down its wolf-like skull, each one the size of Jake's fist. They glowed faintly in the shadows, a dim amber color that flickered like dying embers. Those eyes tracked his movement as he stepped closer, following him with an intelligence that sent chills down his spine. The creature's chest rose and fell in shallow, painful gasps. Dark purple blood, so dark it was almost black, had pooled beneath its body, spreading across the metal ground in a sticky puddle. One of its legs was bent at an unnatural angle. Deep gashes ran along its sides, like something with claws had tried to tear it apart. "What the hell?" Jake whispered, his hand automatically reaching for the translator unit clipped to his belt. He activated the device with trembling fingers. The small screen flickered to life, scanning the creature with invisible waves of energy. A few seconds later, text appeared on the display, and Jake felt his blood run cold. Species, Krevnath classification, Apex Predator threat level, extreme status, extinct. Extinct. The word blinked on his screen like a bad joke. But the creature lying in front of him was very much alive. Barely but alive. Jake's eyes drifted down to the creature's neck, and anger flared hot in his chest. There was a collar there, thick and metallic, with pulsing red lights that blinked in a slow, steady rhythm. He recognized it immediately. A suppression collar. The kind that was illegal in most civilized systems because it was basically a torture device. It drained a living being's energy slowly, painfully, until there was nothing left. Someone hadn't just left this creature here. They'd put that collar on it and abandoned it in this forgotten corner of the station to die a slow, agonizing death. Jake 07, I strongly advise immediate departure. His AI assistant's voice crackled in his earpiece, urgent and insistent. Krevnath are classified as extreme threat level. Apex predators. Historical records indicate they are highly territorial and extremely dangerous. Your survival probability in close proximity is. And dying, Jake cut him off, already taking a step closer to the creature. His mind was made up. Get the medkit from the workshop. The heavy one with the surgical tools. Jake, this is highly inadvisable. The risk factor. That's an order, Jake 07. The AI went silent, but Jake heard the distant hiss of his workshop doors opening. Good. At least the AI knew when to listen. Jake knelt down slowly beside the creature, keeping his movements deliberate and visible. Those 6 amber eyes never left him, watching with an intensity that should have terrified him. Each of the creature's breaths came harder than the last, its chest struggling to rise. Easy there, big guy, Jake said softly, keeping his voice calm and steady. I'm gonna help you. Just, don't eat me when you're feeling better, okay? One of the creature's eyes slowly closed, then opened again. If Jake didn't know better, if he hadn't read all those files about Krevnath being mindless killing machines, he would have sworn the look in those eyes was gratitude. Jake looked at the massive alien wolf, then at his small workshop in the distance. Getting a 400-pound dying creature across the scrapyard and into his workspace was going to be the hardest thing he'd ever attempted. His back was already aching just thinking about it. But Jake Murphy had never walked away from something that needed fixing. Whether it was a broken engine or a dying alien that the whole galaxy had left for dead. Even if everyone thought he was completely insane for trying. 3 days had crawled by since Jake dragged the dying Krevnath into his workshop, and the place looked like a disaster zone. Medical supplies were scattered across every available surface. Bandages, syringes, alien anatomy charts printed from the station's database, and improvised surgical tools that Jake had cobbled together from spare parts. Empty coffee cups formed small towers on his workbench. His hands shook slightly from exhaustion and too much caffeine. Jake hadn't slept more than 20 minutes at a stretch. Every time he closed his eyes, he'd jolt awake, terrified that the creature had stopped breathing. He'd stumble over to check its vital signs, then get back to work. His eyes burned. His back ached. But he kept going. The Krevnath lay motionless on a reinforced platform that Jake had welded together using parts from old cargo haulers. The metal frame groaned under the creature's weight, but it held. Jake had managed to stabilize its breathing over the first 48 hours. The deep wounds along its sides were cleaned and bandaged. The broken leg was set and splinted. But that damn collar was still the biggest problem. Jake stood over the creature now, staring at the device clamped around its thick neck. He'd spent hours studying it, running scans, pulling up every technical manual he could find on suppression technology. The collar wasn't just attached, it was fused directly to the creature's biological tissue. Microscopic tendrils had burrowed into skin and muscle like roots. Removing it the wrong way would sever major blood vessels and kill the Krevnath instantly. He'd already tried twice. Both attempts had failed when the collar's fail-safe mechanisms activated, sending painful shocks through the creature's body. Jake had barely managed to shut the device down before it did permanent damage. Okay, Jake muttered to himself, rolling his shoulders to ease the tension. His hands were steady despite the bone-deep exhaustion. Third time's the charm. It has to be. He'd spent the last 6 hours building a bypass system that shouldn't work. It used components from 3 completely different medical systems. One human, one designed for silicon-based life forms, and one from a species he'd never even heard of. None of them were meant to work together. But Jake had always been good at making impossible things function. The theory was simple enough. Drain the collar's power cell while simultaneously pumping synthetic nutrients into the creature's bloodstream to replace everything the collar had been stealing. Do it fast enough and the failsafe wouldn't have time to trigger. Do it too slow and the creature would die anyway. Jake had run the calculations a dozen times. The margin for error was razor thin. He connected the final cable and took a deep breath. His finger hovered over the activation switch. "Here goes nothing," he whispered and pressed it. The bypass hummed to life. Lights flickered across the jury-rigged machinery. The collar pulsed once, a deep red glow that made Jake's heart skip, then the lights faded to nothing. Dead. Powerless. Jake didn't dare breathe as he picked up his cutting torch. His hands moved with practiced precision, slicing through the locking mechanism 1 careful millimeter at a time. Sweat dripped down his face. The workshop felt 20 degrees hotter than it should be. Finally the last lock gave way. The collar fell from the creature's neck with a heavy metallic clunk that echoed through the workshop. For a moment nothing happened. Then the Krevnath's eyes snapped open. All 6 at once. They blazed with amber light, bright and alert and fully aware. Jake stumbled backward, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might burst through his ribs. The creature rose to its full height in one fluid motion. Standing, it was even more massive than Jake had realized. Its head nearly touched the workshop's ceiling. Muscles rippled beneath that midnight black fur, each movement showcasing the raw, devastating power contained in that alien body. Jake understood now. He understood exactly why the galaxy feared these beings. This wasn't just an animal. This was a perfect predator. Pure, concentrated power wrapped in intelligence. The creature took a step toward him. Jake's back hit the wall. He had nowhere to run. That's when his door chimed. The sound made Jake jump. His main screen flickered to life, displaying an incoming transmission marked with red priority codes. Galactic Council. Priority 1. The kind of call you couldn't ignore even if you wanted to. Jake's blood went cold. A reptilian face filled the screen. Scales the color of old copper, eyes like polished amber, and a crest of bony spikes that ran from forehead to neck. Jake recognized the species, Zytherian, one of the founding members of the Galactic Council. Human designate Jake Murphy. The alien's voice was sharp and cold. We have tracked a quarantine specimen to your location. Our sensors indicate it is still alive. You will terminate it immediately or face criminal charges under Galactic Law Section 47-. No, Jake said. Just that one word. Simple and final. The Zytherian's crest flared outward, a sign of anger that Jake had seen in documentaries. You refuse a direct order from the Galactic Council? This creature is too dangerous to exist. The Krevnath were quarantined for the safety of all civilized species. They cannot be. Can't be what? Jake interrupted, his exhaustion burning away into anger. Saved? He stepped between the screen and the creature, putting his own body in the way. This thing was dying with a torture collar around its neck. An illegal torture collar. Who put it there? The Zytherian's eyes narrowed. That information is classified. You do not understand what you are. I understand plenty, Jake shot back. Someone tried to murder this creature slowly. And now you want me to finish the job. Behind him, the Krevnath made a sound, deep and rumbling like distant thunder. Jake felt it vibrate through his chest. The creature was watching. Listening. Understanding every word. The Krevnath called himself Vorash, last guard of a dead world. Those words hung in the air of Jake's workshop like a ghost. Last guard. Jake tried to imagine what that meant, being the final survivor of an entire civilization, carrying the weight of a species that no longer existed. It made his chest tight just thinking about it. Over the next week, as Vorash recovered his strength, Jake learned the truth that the Galactic Council had spent decades trying to bury. The Krevnath hadn't simply died out from disease or natural disaster. They hadn't lost some interstellar war. No, they'd been hunted. Systematically tracked down and eliminated, one by one, across hundreds of worlds. And the reason why made Jake's blood boil. We valued honor over profit, Vorash explained one evening. They were sitting in the workshop, the alien's massive form somehow fitting comfortably in the space. His 6 eyes reflected the flickering lights from Jake's equipment, making them glow like embers. We valued loyalty over political games. We had codes we lived by. Traditions that went back thousands of generations. Jake set down his tools and turned to face Vorash fully. Let me guess. The council didn't like that. They called us savage, Vorash continued, and Jake could hear the old pain in his voice. Uncivilized. Barbaric. They said we were too dangerous to integrate into their perfect galactic society. But the truth was simpler. He paused, his clawed hand clenching slightly. We simply would not compromise what made us who we were. We wouldn't become what they wanted us to be. Jake nodded slowly. Yeah, I'm getting the feeling the council doesn't like anyone who won't play their game by their rules. You understand, Vorash said, and there was something like relief in his tone. Your people are young. New to the galaxy. But you understand what my people died for. The conversation shifted as Jake returned to his current project. A derelict ship he'd been slowly restoring for months. It was old Terran military surplus, probably from the early colony wars. Jake had big plans for it once he got the engines working properly. Vorash moved closer, his massive head tilting as he examined Jake's work. This vessel, you are repairing it incorrectly. Jake felt a flash of irritation. He'd been working on ships since he was 16 years old. Hey, I've been doing this for. But Vorash wasn't listening. His clawed hand reached out with surprising delicacy, adjusting a power coupling that Jake had spent 3 hours configuring. The diagnostic screen lit up instantly, showing green across every single system. Perfect integration. Zero power loss. Jake's mouth fell open. How did you? I've been fighting with that coupling for days. My people were engineers long before your species learned to harness fire, Vorash said. There was no arrogance in his voice, just simple fact. The council wanted everyone to forget that. They wanted history to remember us only as warriors. As threats. But we built cities that touched the clouds. Ships that could cross galaxies. Technologies your people won't discover for another 1,000 years. He looked at Jake with those ancient eyes. Let me show you. What followed was 3 of the most incredible hours of Jake's life. Vorash taught him techniques that weren't in any manual, showed him approaches to problem solving that Jake had never even considered. The alien's knowledge was vast and deep, accumulated over a lifetime that Jake could barely comprehend. They worked side by side, human and Krevnath, and the old ship began to hum with new life. Jake was laughing at something Vorash had said. The alien had a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard. When Jake 07's voice cut through the workshop. Jake, I have urgent news. The AI's tone was tight with worry. 6 armed council enforcers just entered the station. Security cameras show them moving through the commercial sector. They're heading directly toward us. Jake's stomach dropped. He grabbed his plasma cutter from the workbench. It wasn't much of a weapon, designed for cutting through metal, not fighting soldiers, but it was better than nothing. Vorash, you need to hide, Jake said quickly, looking around the workshop for somewhere the massive alien could conceivably fit. There's a storage bay in the back. No. Vorash's voice was calm, still as deep water. He moved toward the main door with fluid grace. I hide from no one. Not anymore. I have hidden for too long already. Jake wanted to argue, but the look in those 6 eyes stopped him. This wasn't about pride. This was about dignity. About refusing to be hunted anymore. The workshop door exploded inward. 6 enforcers burst through, weapons raised and charged. Jake recognized the species. 2 Zytherian, 3 from species he didn't know, and 1 that looked like walking granite. Professional soldiers. Trained killers. All of them pointing guns at Vorash. Stand down or we open fire, the lead enforcer shouted. What happened next took less than 30 seconds, but Jake would remember every moment for the rest of his life. Vorash moved like liquid shadow. Like darkness given form and purpose. The first enforcer didn't even see the strike coming. One moment he was aiming his weapon, the next it was flying across the workshop and he was on his knees, gasping. Conscious. Uninjured except for his pride. The second and third went down together, a blur of motion that Jake's eyes couldn't quite follow. Their guns clattered across the floor. The fourth enforcer managed to fire once. The plasma bolt screamed through the air. Vorash simply wasn't there anymore. He was beside the soldier instead, catching his arm with gentleness that seemed impossible for those massive claws. The enforcer slumped to the ground, unconscious but breathing steadily. The final 2 enforcers looked at each other. Their weapons dropped to the floor with metallic clangs. Their hands went up in surrender. Jake stood frozen, the plasma cutter dangling uselessly in his grip. His heart was hammering. His mind was trying to process what he'd just witnessed. Vorash hadn't killed anyone. Hadn't even seriously injured them. Every strike had been measured. Controlled. Perfect. Jake 07, the AI whispered in Jake's ear, I think I'm more frightened now than if he'd just killed them all. Jake understood exactly what his AI meant. Anyone could be violent. Any creature could kill when threatened. But this level of skill, this perfect restraint while moving with such devastating speed? The Council hadn't feared the Krevnath because they were violent killers. They'd feared them because they were better. Better than anyone wanted to admit. The underground networks of the galaxy moved information faster than any official channel ever could. Smugglers talked to traders. Traders talked to pirates. Pirates talked to refugees. Within just a few days, every outlaw, rebel, and free spirit from one end of civilized space to the other had heard the impossible news. The last Krevnath lives and he's being protected by a human mechanic on New Terra Station. Jake was elbow deep in a power conduit replacement when Jake 07's voice crackled in his ear. Jake, we have 3 incoming ships. Unknown signatures. They're moving in tight formation and requesting permission to land in the scrapyard. Jake pulled his arm out of the conduit, wiping grease and coolant from his hands onto his already filthy work pants. More council enforcers coming back for round 2? Negative. There was something strange in the AI's voice. Uncertainty. Maybe even awe. These signatures don't match any council vessel in my database. Jake, you really need to see this. Jake climbed out from under the ship he was working on and walked to the workshop's main window. Through the scratched glass, he could see 3 small ships descending toward the scrapyard. They were old, ancient actually, and looked like they'd been repaired 100 times with whatever parts their pilots could scavenge. Battle scars covered their hulls. These were survivor ships. Vessels that had been running and hiding for a very long time. The ships touched down in a clear area between the mountains of scrap metal. Their landing gear hissed as hydraulics deployed. For a long moment nothing happened. Jake held his breath. Then the doors opened. 3 more Krevnath emerged into the sunlight. Jake's heart stopped. 2 males and 1 female, each one as massive and magnificent as Vorash. But these 3 bore scars that told stories of pain and survival. One male was missing part of his left ear. The female had a long scar running down her shoulder. The other male walked with a slight limp. These were beings who'd been hunted across the galaxy and somehow lived to tell about it. They moved cautiously toward the workshop, their heads held high despite the obvious wariness in their posture. Every step was measured. Careful. Like they expected an ambush at any moment. Vorash must have sensed them. The workshop door opened and he stepped outside. Jake followed, not sure what he was about to witness but knowing it was important. What happened next was something Jake would never forget. The four Krevnath circled each other slowly, like planets orbiting the same sun. They moved closer, closer, until their foreheads touched. All four of them made sounds that Jake's ears could barely register, deep vibrations that he felt in his chest more than heard. It was a song. A greeting. Something ancient and sacred. When they finally separated, all four had tears streaming down their faces from all six eyes. Tears that caught the light like diamonds. "We thought we were alone," the female said, her voice cracking with emotion that transcended species. "We heard whispers through the underground networks. Stories that seemed impossible. That one of us still lived. That a human had." She couldn't finish the sentence. She turned to look at Jake and he saw himself reflected in those six amber eyes. Then she did something that made his heart nearly stop beating. She lowered her massive head in a gesture of profound respect. A bow from a being that probably hadn't bowed to anyone in her entire life. "You are Pack now," she said, her voice steady despite the tears. "I am Ren, the daughter of the northern mountains." The male with the scarred ear stepped forward next. Corvan, last of the coastal guards. His voice was rough, like gravel grinding together. The limping male nodded. "Thexel. I was a teacher before the hunting began." Jake didn't know what to say. What could you say to beings who'd lost everything? Who'd been alone for so long they'd forgotten what hope felt like? "Welcome," he finally managed. "All of you. There's not much space but we'll make it work." Jake's workshop, originally built for one human mechanic and his basic tools, had suddenly become sanctuary to the last four members of a hunted species. It was crowded. It was chaotic. But somehow it felt right. That feeling lasted exactly 2 days. Jake, 07 played the incoming message on every screen in the workshop. The same reptilian face that had threatened Jake before, the council overseer, filled the displays. But this time his tone was harder. Angrier. More dangerous. "Earth will be blacklisted from all trade routes effective immediately," the message stated. "No human vessel will be permitted to dock at any station in civilized space. No human trader will be allowed to conduct business. Earth's colonies will receive no supplies or support." The overseer's eyes narrowed. "Unless you surrender the specimens within 24 hours. This is your final warning." The screen went dark. Jake stood in his workshop, surrounded by four apex predators who had trusted him with their lives. For beings who had nowhere else to go. For survivors of genocide. His communicator buzzed. It was Kate Wilson, the station manager and Jake's oldest friend since he'd arrived at New Terra 5 years ago. Her face appeared on his personal screen and she looked worried. "Jake, I just got word from Earth. The council is serious about this. They're already blocking human ships at 3 major trade hubs. People are scared. There's talk that Earth's government might order you to comply." Jake looked at Vorash, then at Renda, Corvan and Thexal. They were watching him. Waiting to see what the human would do now that protecting them had a real cost. Now that it wasn't just his life on the line, but potentially the future of his entire species. "Set up a meeting with anyone from Earth who'll listen," Jake said quietly. "We need to talk about what happens next." Kate's expression shifted. "You're not giving them up, are you?" Jake smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Not a chance. But we're going to need help." Retry DD. The tribunal was broadcast across 10,000 worlds. Billions of beings from hundreds of species tuned in to watch what everyone assumed would be a quick trial followed by swift punishment. A human mechanic had broken galactic law. The outcome seemed inevitable. Jake Murphy stood in the center of the massive council assembly chamber, and he'd never felt smaller in his entire life. The room was enormous, designed to hold representatives from every major civilization in the galaxy. Towering columns stretched toward a ceiling so high it disappeared into shadows. And surrounding him on all sides were the council members, looking down from their elevated platforms like judges at the end of time. Four Krevnath flanked Jake like living shadows. Vorash stood to his right, Renda to his left, with Corvan and Thexal behind him. Their presence should have made him feel safer. Instead, it just reminded him how much was at stake. Council Speaker Veltatha's voice echoed through the chamber. The Krevnath were quarantined for legitimate reasons. They refused integration into civilized society. They rejected our values and our laws. They posed a direct threat to galactic stability and peace. Jake took a breath and stepped forward. His legs felt like rubber, but he forced them to move. "They posed a threat to your control. There's a difference." A murmur rippled through the assembly. Apparently, nobody interrupted the council speaker. Well, Jake figured he was already in deep trouble. Might as well go all in. He pulled up the data files he'd spent weeks compiling. Holographic displays appeared in the air around him, visible to everyone in the chamber. These are records I pulled from public databases. Records you didn't bother to hide because you thought nobody would care enough to look. The display showed the truth. Documents detailing the systematic hunting of Krevnath across dozens of worlds. Orders to eliminate entire communities. Images of suppression collars being used not on criminals but on families. On children. This wasn't quarantine, Jake said, his voice steady now. This was genocide. Half the assembly shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The other half stared at the evidence with expressions ranging from shock to shame. A few, like Veltoth, just looked angry. Vorash stepped forward. When he spoke, his deep voice carried to every corner of that massive chamber. You didn't quarantine us. You tried to erase us because we wouldn't forget who we were to become what you wanted. Because we had the audacity to say no to you. Veltotha's crest flared in rage. Enough. The decision has been made. Human Jake Murphy will be arrested immediately for violation of quarantine protocols. The specimens will be returned to containment and... Try it. The voice came from the back of the chamber. Every head turned. A man walked down the center aisle. He was older than Jake, maybe 50, with gray hair and the weathered look of someone who'd spent his life in space. Tom Bradford, captain of the human freighter New Dawn. Jake had never met him, but he recognized the ship's name from the docking logs. Behind Tom, 20 more humans entered the chamber. Mechanics in grease-stained coveralls. Traders in flight jackets. Colonists in simple work clothes. All from Earth. All standing together. We're here representing the Terran Coalition, Tom announced, his voice calm but firm. You want Jake Murphy? You go through us. Every single one of us. The main viewing screens around the chamber suddenly changed. Security feeds from council facilities across a dozen different worlds. And on every single screen humans were gathering. Hundreds of them. Maybe thousands. They weren't armed. They weren't threatening anyone. They were just standing there. Waiting. Making their presence known. Kate Wilson's voice came through crystal clear from New Terra Station. Earth stands with Jake Murphy. And Earth stands with the Krevnath. The assembly erupted into chaos. 3 council members jumped to their feet, calling for immediate military response. 5 others started arguing for negotiation. Some demanded Jake's arrest. Others called for calm. The chamber filled with shouting in 100 different languages. An elderly representative from a species Jake didn't recognize stood up. Her voice cut through the noise like a knife. In my 300 years of service to this council, I have never witnessed anything like this. A species barely a century into space travel, facing down the oldest government in the galaxy. For beings they just met. For the right thing. She paused. Perhaps we should ask ourselves why they're willing to do that. And why we're not. The debate that followed lasted 6 hours. Jake watched as council members argued, negotiated, made deals and threats. Species that had been allies for centuries suddenly found themselves on opposite sides. The vote, when it finally came, was closer than anyone expected. 847 in favor. 723 against. The Krevnath received protected status under galactic law. Earth would become their official sanctuary world. The hunting was over. Forever. As Jake walked out of the assembly chamber with his pack, Jake 07 chimed in his ear. 16 more Krevnath are broadcasting their locations. They've been hiding across the galaxy. They're asking for permission to come home. Jake felt tears sting his eyes. Home. The Krevnath would have a home again. Vorash placed a massive paw on Jake's shoulder. You taught the galaxy something it had forgotten. That strength isn't just about power. It's about knowing when to show mercy. Jake smiled, exhausted down to his bones but more satisfied than he'd ever felt. We just did what was right. Renda made that rumbling sound that Jake had learned was Krevnath laughter. Exactly. And that is why humans are more dangerous than we ever were. You don't win through force. You win by refusing to let compassion die. In the months that followed, Jake's tiny workshop expanded into something nobody could have predicted. Human engineers learned defensive technologies the Krevnath had developed over thousands of years. The Krevnath learned human improvisation and our strange ability to make broken things work. Together they created something new. Something neither species could have built alone. The Galactic Council watched nervously as Earth and the Krevnath formed an alliance. Not one built on treaties or trade agreements or political maneuvering. But something simpler and far more powerful, friendship earned through action. Jake Murphy, a mechanic who couldn't walk away from a dying creature, had changed the galaxy's course. Not with weapons. Not with grand speeches. But with the most human response imaginable. Someone needed help. So he helped. And the universe would never be quite the same.